Subconscious Triggers, Anchors that Influence Decisions. Published by Viridian. Chapter 1. Every day, the mind makes thousands of decisions, from the tiny and automatic, which coffee to reach for, to the large and deliberate, which job to accept. Most of these choices feel consciously driven. We weigh pros and cons, remember past experiences, and imagine future outcomes. Yet a surprising portion of what steers us happens below the surface. There are invisible levers, cues, sensations, images, phrases, even smells, that anchor our thoughts and push our behavior in predictable directions. This book is about those levers, subconscious triggers, the anchors that influence decisions before you even notice them. Imagine walking into a store and finding yourself buying a product you had no intention of buying. Or consider how a simple phrase in a conversation can make someone more agreeable, more defensive, or more likely to act. Anchors aren't spooky magic. They are the product of patterns the brain uses to conserve energy, speed decision-making, and connect meaning across time. When an anchor attaches to a feeling or an idea, it gives that feeling a shortcut. The next time the brain senses the same anchor, the associated reaction flows out with far less friction. This is not a book promising manipulation or shortcuts to control other people. It's a practical, ethical exploration of how anchors work, why they are so powerful, and how you can recognize and responsibly use them to make better decisions, communicate more clearly, and design environments that support desired outcomes. Over the coming chapters, you'll learn how anchors form, how advertisers, negotiators, therapists, and everyday people use them, and how to build anchors that support your goals rather than undermine them. To make this real, start with a small, almost universal anchor: music and mood. Consider how a song can instantly transport you to a moment: high school graduation, a first date, a winter afternoon at your grandparents' house. The music didn't create those memories. It became attached to them. When the song returns, the emotions do too. That attachment is an anchor at work. It's not mystical. It's associative learning. The brain links patterns, a melody, a scent, the rhythm of a phrase, to emotional states, and later replays the state when the pattern reappears. Because emotions are powerful drivers of behavior, these associations become one of the brain's most efficient routes to action. Anchors operate at different speeds. Some are fast and sensory, the smell of citrus that cleans and refreshes, reducing the time you spend considering alternatives. Some are slower and conceptual, a repeated story or metaphor that reshapes how you understand a problem over months. Some anchors are internal, like a posture shift that calms you before a presentation. Others are social, like the status cues in a room that change the way people speak and listen. We'll examine all of them, the quick triggers and the long game anchors, because mastering influence requires both swift interventions and patient design. If you're skeptical, that's healthy. People often conflate persuasion with manipulation, and the idea that invisible cues shape behavior can feel unsettling. That's why the first practical lesson in this book is awareness. Before you try to set anchors in the world, learn to spot the anchors already at work in your life. Observe how your moods rise and fall with particular advertisements. Note how certain phrases set a tone in meetings. Pay attention to how physical spaces, a cluttered desk versus a tidy table, influence what you decide to do. Awareness is not about paranoia. It's about reclaiming the steering wheel. Once you can recognize the anchors, you'll be able to decide whether to keep, strengthen, weaken, or replace them. There's also a moral dimension. Anchors can be used to help patients overcome trauma, to help students learn, to guide people toward healthier choices. They can also be used to sell things people don't need or to nudge choices that undermine autonomy. Throughout this book, I'll be explicit about ethical lines, how to spot manipulation, how to refuse it, and how to design influence that respects agency. I believe that learning how influence works makes you less vulnerable to abuse and more capable of building environments that genuinely benefit people. Practically, this book is structured to be both informative and usable. After this introduction, Chapter 2 will explore the neuroscience and psychology behind anchors, the basic mechanisms of association, priming, and emotional tagging. Chapter 3 will look at sensory anchors, sound, smell, taste, and touch, the ways physical stimuli prime decisions. Chapter 4 will examine language anchors, metaphors, framing, and the rhythm of speech that shape frames of mind. Chapter 5 will dive into social anchors, status cues, mimicry, and the small rituals that coordinate group behavior. Chapter 6 will be about internal anchors, posture, breath, and tiny rituals that transform states of mind. Chapter 7 will focus on environment and habit architecture, how we design places and routines that anchor long-term behavior. Chapter 8 will explore applied influence across fields, marketing, negotiation, therapy, and leadership, with case studies and practical templates. Chapter 9 will teach how to dismantle harmful anchors, techniques for weakening bad habits, resisting unwanted influence, and creating robust personal boundaries. The final chapter will synthesize everything and offer a practical plan, a 12-week anchor toolkit you can adapt to your life. But before you dive into technical models, I want to offer a small exercise that will prime your awareness and prepare yourself for the rest of the book. Over the next 2 days, keep a simple anchor log. Each time you notice a sudden shift in mood, an impulse to act, or a change in motivation, write down the immediate sensory context, what you saw, heard, smelled, touched, or the exact words that preceded the shift. Keep entries minimal. 1 sentence is enough. After 2 days, you'll see patterns. Maybe your focus dips every afternoon after a sugary snack. Maybe certain phrases and messages energize you while others flatten your mood. That tiny log is the first real data you have about the anchors that live in your life. Why keep a log? Because influence feels invisible, and what we can measure we can change. The log is not a clinical instrument. It's your personal radar. It will reveal how susceptible you are to quick sensory anchors and where deeper conceptual anchors have taken root. This knowledge will let you take small, immediate steps that build momentum. Finally, a promise. This book won't turn you into someone who wins every argument or sells anything to anyone. That will be shallow and ethically suspect. Instead, the aim is subtler and more valuable. To give you the tools to notice the hidden forces around you, to use anchors in ways that align with your values, and to protect yourself from influence that doesn't. By the end, you'll be able to design simple anchors that make decisions easier, habits stickier, and communication clearer, all without coercion. Turn the page when you're ready. We begin by lifting the hood, how the brain builds anchors, why they endure, and how the simplest associations can become the most powerful drivers of human behavior. Chapter 2. How do invisible cues become automatic drivers of behavior? To answer that, we need to walk into the brain and meet the basic learning machinery that forms anchors. This chapter gives you the compact layperson's guide to the psychology and neuroscience behind anchoring, the mechanisms that let a smell, a phrase, or a posture gain the power to shift choices. Understanding these mechanisms turns mystery into leverage. Once you see how anchors form, you can create them intentionally or remove them when they harm you. At the most basic level, anchors are built from association. Association is the brain's favorite shortcut. 2 things that regularly appear together, a bell and food, a friend and laughter, a song and a place, become linked in memory. When one element appears again, the other is automatically summoned. This principle was first described in experiments by Ivan Pavlov. He rang a bell each time his dogs were fed. After repeated pairings, the bell alone triggered salivation. Pavlov's experiment is the archetype of classical conditioning, and anchors often start the same way. Repeated pairings create a reflexive link between an external cue and an internal state. But human anchors are rarely as simple as bell food pairs. We layer meanings, expectations, and social context on top of sensory associations. That's where priming comes in. Priming occurs when exposure to one stimulus subtly changes how you respond to a subsequent stimulus, often without conscious awareness. Read the word doctor, and you'll be quicker to recognize the word nurse a moment later. Advertisers prime attitudes by showing images that make certain values more accessible in the viewer's mind. The key feature of priming is that it changes the probability of thoughts and behaviors by making related ideas easier to bring to mind. Underpinning these phenomena are learning rules implemented by neural circuits. Hebb's old idea, neurons that fire together, wire together, captures essence. When two neural representations are active at the same time, the synaptic connections between them strengthen. Over time, activation of the cue's representation is more likely to trigger the representation of the associated state. This synaptic strengthening is the biological substrate of an anchor. Emotion magnifies this process. Emotional experiences are more likely to be remembered and to form durable associations. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure, tags experiences with emotional salience. The hippocampus encodes contextual detail, and together they make some anchors stick far longer and exert greater pull. That's why a single frightening incident can create a powerful anchor, a particular song, a smell, or a phrase that later drags fear up into consciousness. Conversely, positive emotional anchors, the warmth of praise coupled with a small ritual, for instance, can be highly durable and constructive. Reward systems also play a central role. The neurotransmitter dopamine signals prediction error, the difference between expected and actual outcomes. When a cue reliably predicts a reward, dopamine firing shifts from the reward itself to the cue that precedes it. Over time, the cue becomes a powerful motivator. It triggers expectation and the preparatory state for action. This mechanism explains why habit cues, a time of day, a place, or preceding action, can feel like urges. The brain has learned that the cue forecasts a rewarding outcome. There's a second kind of learning that builds anchors: reinforcement learning. Operant conditioning describes how behavior is shaped by the consequences that follow it. If a behavior consistently produces a desirable outcome, the actions that preceded it, the context and the cues, become more likely to reappear. This is how routines cement into habits. Many anchors in daily life are the byproduct of reinforcement learning. The chair where you always read becomes a cue to relax. The sequence of directions you take before work becomes a trigger for a mental state geared toward tasks. Implicit memory and procedural memory hold anchors tight without the need for conscious recollection. You don't have to remember training steps to act on an anchor. The body and mind can carry the association. That's why I practice ritual, a breathing technique before speaking, a fist tap before lifting weights, can reliably change performance even when you aren't thinking about the mechanism. Human brains are social brains, and social learning amplifies anchors. Mirror neurons and related systems help us mimic and internalize the gestures, expressions, and tones of others. When a respected person uses a specific phrase or posture, observers can rapidly pick up that anchor. Social validation also strengthens anchors. If many people behave in line with a cue, the cue gains normative force. That's why social context, a room full of nodding listeners, a company culture that prizes punctuality, becomes a powerful anchor for individual behavior. Contextual specificity matters. Anchors are often bound to particular contexts. A smell may trigger relaxation in your home, but not in a busy office. That's because the brain encodes the context along with the cue, and retrieval tends to be context-dependent. This is a double-edged sword. Context-bound anchors are powerful where they apply, but they may not generalize. If you want an anchor to work across situations, you must practice it in varied contexts, so the association extends beyond one setting. Another key idea is that anchors can operate unconsciously. Much of the brain's associative processing happens below the level of explicit awareness. Priming experiments repeatedly show behavioral change without reported conscious intent. This invisibility is why anchors can feel like fate rather than influence. You wonder why you chose a certain option, not realizing a small cue nudged you. Awareness is therefore a crucial defense. When you train yourself to notice the triggers that precede your decisions, you reclaim control. Anchors also interact. Multiple cues can converge to produce stronger effects. Conflicting cues can weaken or override one another. That's why skilled influencers layer sensory, linguistic, and social anchors together. The music, the wording, and the social proof all point the audience in the same direction. Conversely, to break an unwanted anchor, you can introduce competing cues or practice response substitution, pairing the original cue with a new, desired response until the old link loosens. Finally, there are important limitations and ethical considerations. The brain's learning rules are robust, but not omnipotent. Anchors can reduce friction and free cognitive resources, but they can also entrench unhelpful habits and biases. Because anchors operate invisibly, they can be exploited. That's why understanding these mechanisms carries responsibility. Use anchors to empower, to heal, and to make choices easier, not to coerce or deceive. To make this chapter practical, try a small experiment. Pick a simple, neutral physical action, a single deep inhalation with a counted 1-2 finger tap, and pair it with a short, positive state after completing it. For example, 5 seconds of focused attention on something you're grateful for. Repeat this pairing 3 times a day for a week, always in the same context, and note whether the action gradually starts to evoke a calmer, focused state. If it does, you create a tiny anchor. If not, vary the context or deepen the emotional tag. Either way, noticing the microprocess association will give you a visceral lesson in how anchors form. Understanding the brain's learning principles demystifies anchors and makes them manageable. They are not mystical levers, but patterns etched into neural tissue by repetition, reward, and emotion. In the next chapter, we'll move from theory to the senses themselves, how sound, scent, touch, taste, and visual design provide prime material for building anchors in everyday life. Chapter 3. Sensory cues are the raw materials of anchors. Before words or arguments have a chance to persuade, our senses are already sorting the world into signals that mean safety, urgency, pleasure, or threat. Taste, smell, sound, touch, and sight are not just ways of perceiving. They're highways into mood, memory, and readiness to act. This chapter explores how each sense forms anchors, how those anchors influence decisions, and how you can ethically use or blunt them in daily life. Start with sound. Sound is immediate and social. Its rhythms and patterns prime tempo, emotion, and expectation. Walk into a cafe where a slow, mellow track plays, and you're more likely to sit, linger, and sip slowly. Turn the tempo up and people move faster. Choose quicker options and linger less. Music can anchor mood because it consistently pairs with emotional context. Wedding music becomes attached to joy, a somber hymn to reverence. Language itself is sonic. The cadence and pitch of a voice carry persuasion before the content does. A calm, steady delivery anchors trust. A rushed, high-pitched delivery often signals anxiety. Using sound as an anchor is often subtle and ethical when aligned with the listener's interest. For a public speaker, a brief pause before a key line, followed by a lower pitch and a gentle cadence, can anchor attention and importance. For a personal routine, a short playlist that you only play while studying can prime focus because the music becomes associated with concentrated effort. The practical rule: be intentional and selective. Repeated pairings make the anchor. Use them to support desired states. Don't use them to manipulate others into choices they wouldn't otherwise make. Smell is unusually powerful because olfactory signals bypass much of the brain's deliberate filtering and connect directly to memory and emotion. A scent tied to a childhood kitchen can flood you with nostalgia in a second. That's why marketers perfume retail environments, to anchor comfort and increase dwell time, and why therapists use calming scents to reduce anxiety in sessions. Smells are also context-bound. The same scent may soothe in a bedroom and distract in a lab. If you want to build a scent anchor, pair a pleasant, distinct scent with a specific, repeatable state. Try a brief ritual. Inhale a particular essential oil while spending 3 focused minutes on a goal. Repeat daily. Over time, the scent will cue that focused state. But be mindful. People have differing scent sensitivities and cultural associations. Never impose scent anchors in shared public spaces without consent. Taste anchors are intimate and often social. Meals anchor conversation, comfort, celebration. The taste of a specific dish can pull up memories and change how you evaluate a present choice. In behavior change, taste anchors can be harnessed for good. Pairing a healthy but initially neutral food with positive celebration after a workout can create an association between that food and reward. Conversely, using sugary rewards to reinforce negative behaviors can create powerful but unhealthy anchors. Taste is potent precisely because it is immediately rewarding and intimately tied to bodily states. Use it to support well-being, not to short-circuit it. Touch and bodily sensation are anchors we often ignore. The simple act of placing your feet on the ground, straightening your spine, or pressing your fingertips together can shift your felt state. Physical rituals, clenching and releasing a fist, a 2-breath cadence, or a specific posture, become tactile anchors when consistently paired with an internal state. Athletes use these anchors all the time. A pre-serve routine in tennis, a breathing pattern before a lift. For public speaking, a discreet hand gesture or finger press can be a private anchor that signals calm. Because touch is embodied, these anchors tend to generalize across contexts more easily than sensory anchors tied to external stimuli. Vision is perhaps the most flexible anchor because visual design can be crafted to guide attention and interpretive frames. Color, layout, and light influence decisions. Blue tends to calm. Red can signal urgency or appetite depending on context. A clean, uncluttered interface anchors clarity and trust. A messy one anchors distraction and doubt. Visual anchors are persuasive because they create immediate expectations. A polished brochure suggests credibility. A handwritten note suggests intimacy. Designers and communicators exploit this knowledge, but you can too organize your workspace to anchor productivity. Clear desk, warm light, a single plant, or curate your online profile to anchor professionalism, consistent imagery and tone. Senses rarely operate alone. Multi-sensory anchors, sound plus light, scent plus texture, are far more durable because they offer redundant cues to the same state. That redundancy is why ritual feels so convincing. It layers breath, posture, and a short phrase into a single anchored moment. Layering also increases ethical responsibility. When multiple cues push someone in the same direction, their ability to notice and resist weakens. Use this power with respect. A practical way to experiment is to choose one decision you want to make easier and design a small sensory anchor around it. Suppose you want to write for an hour each morning. Pick a unique playlist sound, a specific mug, site/texture, and a set you only use during writing smell. Each morning, set these elements and take 3 deep breaths before starting. After a week or 2, the sensory package will start signaling your brain that it's writing time, reducing the friction of choice. The key is consistency and exclusivity. The more you isolate the anchor for that activity, the stronger the association. Ethics must be foreground when applying sensory anchors. Anchors that aid self-regulation, helping you focus, sleep, or reduce anxiety, are typically benign. Anchors used to exploit, manipulate, or override someone's autonomy are not. Before you set anchors in shared environments, consider consent and accessibility. Some people have allergies, trauma-linked sensory triggers, or cultural meanings attached to certain scents and sounds. A mindful approach asks, does this anchor respect other people's agency? Does it serve a mutually beneficial outcome? Finally, learn to interrupt unwanted sensory anchors. If a smell or jingle drags you into craving or stress, introduce a competing cue and a new response. If a song primes stress, replace it with neutral or calming track and practice a different ritual when that song would otherwise play. For bodily anchors that pull you into tension, add grounding practices. Sensing your feet, shrinking your shoulders, and retrain the cue with a calmer response. Senses are the scaffolding on which anchors build. They are immediate, often unconscious, and easy to test. Use them to craft environments and rituals that align with your values and goals, while staying alert to the ethical implications of nudging others. In the next chapter, we'll move into language, how words, metaphors, and framing create conceptual anchors that shape thought and decision even more subtly than the senses. Chapter 4. Words are clothes ideas wear. Before your listener inspect a claim for logic or evidence, language is already dressed that claim in a mood, a frame, and a set of expectations. In other words, language is one of the most efficient ways to anchor meaning. A single metaphor, a well-placed presupposition, or a subtle rhythm can make an idea feel familiar, urgent, safe, or risky, often without the listener noticing. This chapter explores how language builds anchors, the frames, metaphors, and rhetorical patterns that shape what people notice, how they feel about it, and which options they consider natural. Start with framing. Framing is simply choosing which aspects of reality to highlight. If you present a glass as half empty, you evoke loss and scarcity. Present it as half full, you invite optimism and possibility. Frames are powerful because they set the mental stage on which reasoning happens. People rarely step outside the frame you provide. They argue within it. That's why skilled communicators spend far more time choosing frames and defending facts. The practical implication is not to deceive, but to be deliberate. Name the frame you want your audience to use. If a team is stuck in blame, reframe the problem as a learning opportunity. If a customer is anxious about risk, reframe a choice as a way to protect what matters. Frames do 2 things. They make some options more salient, and they attach emotional coloration to those options. Metaphor is a specialized kind of frame. When you say time is money, you don't mean time literally contains currency. You're borrowing the structure of one domain, finance, to make sense of another, time management. Metaphors anchor understanding because they map familiar patterns onto new problems. Because metaphors carry entire networks of associations, a single image can shift how someone thinks about a complex issue. For example, describing a company's culture as a garden invites care, seasonality, and slow growth. Calling a machine invites control, efficiency, and maintenance. When you choose a metaphor, you automatically bring along the values and solutions that fit that metaphor. Use metaphors to make abstract ideas concrete, but choose them carefully. A sloppy metaphor can mislead as easily as it clarifies. Language also anchors through presupposition, the assumptions embedded in the words you use. If I ask, when did you last feel excited about a project? I presuppose that you have felt excitement about a project at some point, nudging you to recall and perhaps re-experience that state. Presuppositions are powerful because they can plant ideas without overt assertion. They are routinely used in everyday conversation and can be ethical tools for helping someone access resources. For example, presupposing competence by saying, "How will you apply your experience here?" rather than "Do you have any experience?" The ethical line is crossed when presuppositions are used to gaslight or to falsely imply facts that aren't true. Rhythm and pacing matter more than most people realize. The cadence of a sentence, its length, pauses, and repetition, shapes attention and expectation. Short, staccato sentences increase perceived urgency. Long, flowing sentences create spaciousness and thoughtfulness. Speakers and writers use pacing to anchor emotional state. A slow, measured cadence can anchor calm. A fast one can anchor excitement. Pauses are particularly useful anchors because they create a small vacuum that the next words fill with importance. A well-timed silence before a key point makes that point feel weightier. Practice noticing rhythm in everyday speech and in media. Listen to how a podcast host lowers their voice before a punchline or how a TED speaker uses pause to let an idea land. Repetition and patterns are the simplest language anchors. Repeat a phrase and it becomes familiar. Familiarity breeds acceptance. Advertisers know this. Slogans become anchors because they are short, repeated, and emotionally resonant. Repetition can be ethical and useful for learning. Repeat a new habit cue until it sticks, and dangerous when it fosters false familiarity with misinformation. The rule of thumb: repeat ideas that are true and useful, and avoid using repetition to manufacture unearned credibility. Contrast is another linguistic lever. Present two options side by side, and the difference becomes the anchor. If a price is first shown as $1,200 and then revealed as $799, the second number feels like a bargain because of the contrast. In conversation, contrast and clarify values. This approach is slow but steady. That one is fast but risky. Contrast makes trade-offs visible and helps people choose deliberately. Ethically, avoid creating false contrasts or hiding important information that would change the comparison. Labeling, giving something a name, is a surprisingly powerful anchor. Once an experience or person is labeled, interpretation tends to follow. Calling someone resilient primes observers to notice evidence of resilience. Labeling can be a generous tool. Naming a small success as progress can solidify identity change. It can also be manipulative when labels stick unfairly. Use labels to highlight strengths and to guide attention toward productive evidence. Narrative anchors deserve special attention. Stories are concentrated packets of cause, effect, and emotion. They map how events connect and what they mean. A well-told story doesn't just convey facts. It anchors a moral frame, a set of assumptions, and an emotional orientation. That's why case studies, personal anecdotes, and parables are persuasive. They let listeners experience the lesson rather than just evaluate it. For persuasion that respects autonomy, favor stories that illuminate rather than coerce. Tell the tale of someone who tried an approach, what they learned, and let listeners draw their own conclusion. There are conversational techniques that use language patterns to guide attention. Pacing and leading, for instance. Pacing begins by matching observable reality. It's a rainy Tuesday and the team's behind schedule, which creates rapport because you're anchored in shared facts. Once rapport exists, you can lead by introducing a slight shift in the frame, and that delay could be our chance to rethink what matters most. This is not trickery. It's about meeting people where they are and offering a new direction from a place of shared understanding. The danger is in feigning facts to gain rapport. Always base pacing on honest, observable points. Embedded commands are short, directive phrases tucked into larger sentences that can act as anchors. For example, many people, when they try this, find themselves relaxing and letting go. They borrow rhythm and subordination to make the command feel less invasive. Because they work at the edge of awareness, embedded commands require ethical restraint. Don't use them to manipulate people into actions they would not consent to if fully aware. Finally, be explicit about transparency and consent. When you use language to influence others, whether in leadership, teaching, or sales, make your intentions clear if the stakes are meaningful. Anchoring language that helps people make better decisions, clarifying choices, reducing irrelevant fear, pointing out trade-offs, is a public good. Language that hides important trade-offs, misleads about consequences, or pressures someone into a decision they reject with full information is unethical. A practical exercise. Pick a short idea you want to communicate, a meeting objective, a personal habit, or a description of a project. Write 3 versions of the same message. One framed as loss. What will be lost if you don't act? One framed as gain. What will be gained by acting? And one as a story, a short anecdote illustrating the outcome. Deliver each version aloud and notice which one changes how you feel about the idea. Then ask a trusted colleague which version made the choice clearer. This practice will sharpen your sensitivity to frames and show how small choices in wording can anchor different responses. Words are not neutral. They carry frames, metaphors, rhythms, and hidden assumptions that guide thought and feeling. Used with integrity, language can build anchors that help people decide more easily, learn faster, and feel more seen. Misuse, it can obscure and coerce. The next chapter will move from language inside the mind to the social anchors between people. How status cues, mimicry, and small rituals synchronize groups and shape choices. Chapter 5. Humans are famously social animals. Long before we had language or laws, we lived in groups where coordination, cooperation, and status mattered for survival. Because of that history, our brains are wired to read tiny social signals and respond almost reflexively. A nod, a posture, a glance, or the way someone addresses you can change not only what you think but what you choose to do. These social anchors, status cues, mimicry, small rituals, and shared signals are among the most potent and durable influences on decision. In this chapter, we explore how they work, why they're so effective, and how to use them in ways that build healthy relationships and collective success rather than manipulation or conformity for its own sake. Start with status cues. Status is shorthand for who should lead, who has knowledge, and who gets deference. People infer status from dozens of tiny signals. How someone occupies space, their calm under pressure, the cadence of their speech, the subtle styling of clothing, or the brief ways others defer to them. Status cues act as anchors because they make certain actions feel normal or rewarded. If the person leading a meeting takes off their jacket and leans forward to ask questions, others often lower barriers and follow. If a respected team member openly experiments and fails, the team learns that risk-taking is acceptable. That's the power of modeling. Leaders' behavior anchors expectations and sets the social temperature. Mimicry is a related social device. We unconsciously copy gestures, facial expressions, posture, and even speech rhythm of people we like or want to belong to. This behavioral synchrony fosters rapport and trust because mirroring signals similarity and similarity signals safety. That's why salespeople match the tone and pace of clients' voice subtly, or why couples in stable relationships tend to mirror each other's body language. Mimicry works because it short-circuits the time it takes to build rapport. It anchors connection fast. Ethically applied, mimicry helps people feel understood and heard. Unethically used, it can be a tool for smoothing over manipulation. The rule is simple: mirror to connect, not to deceive. Small rituals are social anchors that stabilize groups and mark transitions. A quick check-in at the start of a meeting, a clap before a performance, or the ritual of saying good morning in a workplace aren't just quaint. They coordinate attention and align mental states. Rituals reduce ambiguity by producing predictable patterns. When everyone performs a ritual, the group moves from scattered individuals into a coordinated unit. Because rituals repeat, they create long-term social anchors. Shared rituals become part of identity. Teams that ritualize reflection or gratitude anchor resilience. Families that have dinner together anchor connection. If you want a group to adopt a new behavior, create a ritual that makes that behavior the obvious next step. Social proof is another powerful anchor. People often look to others when deciding how to behave, especially in uncertain situations. If most attendees at a workshop start taking notes, a latecomer will likely do the same. If a restaurant is full, passers-by infer quality and choose to dine there. Social proof anchors norms by making certain actions visible and therefore more likely to be copied. This is why testimonials, reviews, and visible participation work in persuasion. They show the norm. Use social proof to encourage beneficial behavior. Display the percentage of neighbors who recycle. Highlight the number of subscribers who completed a course, but avoid manufacturing fake evidence or making minorities feel shamed. Conformity and norm enforcement are double-edged. Norms are useful. They coordinate traffic, nudge civility, and make complex coordination tractable. Yet the same mechanisms produce groupthink and suppress dissent. Anchoring social behavior can therefore be harmful if it locks in bad decisions or ostracizes dissenters. A wise social anchorer builds constructive dissent into the system. Ritualize ways to surface alternate views, normalize I don't know statements, and reward well-reasoned objections. That way the group's anchors support robust decision-making rather than mere agreement. Nonverbal microsignals deserve attention because they're fast and often unconscious. Eye contact, orientation of the torso, the micro-timing of a smile. These signal openness, dominance, interest, or disengagement. Learn to read and project microsignals intentionally. If you want to anchor approachability, angle your body slightly toward the door of the room. Lower your shoulders and maintain soft eye contact. If you need to anchor authority in a negotiation, slow your speech, lower pitch if natural, and reduce fidgeting. Importantly, microsignals must be authentic. People detect incongruence quickly and distrust follows. Reputation acts as a long-term social anchor. Over time, how you show up becomes a filter through which people interpret your actions. Small, consistent behaviors, arriving on time, following through, showing curiosity, anchor a reputation for reliability or openness. Reputation anchors expectations, which makes future influence easier. Invest in reputation as a strategic anchor by choosing a small number of values to signal consistently and visibly. Applying social anchors ethically means focusing on shared benefit and consent. Use status cues to model the behaviors you want everyone to emulate. Calmness in crisis, curiosity in dialogue. Use rituals to lower friction toward positive habits. Short, repeatable acts that make good choices the path of least resistance. Use social proof to normalize constructive practices. And design systems that welcome dissent and correct course when anchors have ossified into poor norms. Practical exercises help make these ideas usable. First, try a 1-week experiment in intentional modeling. Pick a behavior you want your team to adopt, e.g., starting meetings with a 60-second agenda check. Model every day, and watch how quickly others mirror the ritual. Keep a simple log: who followed, who resisted, and what changed in decision speed or clarity. Second, practice conscious mimicry for rapport. In a low-stakes conversation, subtly match the other person's posture and breathing for a minute, then return to your natural posture. Notice whether the person opens up more or feels more aligned afterward. Finally, audit existing rituals and norms. List the rituals your team already has. Evaluate whether they support or hinder your goals, and design one micro-ritual to test for 2 weeks. Breaking harmful social anchors often requires social courage. If a norm is toxic, naming it aloud can be a powerful first step. We seem to have a habit of shutting down pushback. How can we change that? Pair naming with a new ritual that rewards a desired behavior, e.g., a short challenge round, in meetings where objections are explicitly invited. Change the visible signals: who speaks first, who is given airtime, and the anchor will shift. Social anchors are subtle because they operate through the web of relationships and shared expectations. They can synchronize groups and make cooperation effortless, but they can also entrench bad patterns. Use them deliberately. Model the behavior, ritualize the good, invite dissent, and monitor for unintended consequences. Over time, thoughtful social anchoring builds cultures where decisions are faster, healthier, and more aligned with collective values. In the next chapter, we'll turn inward and look at internal anchors, how posture, breath, and small rituals anchor the states we bring to the world. Chapter 6. Your body is not just a vehicle for your mind. It's a powerful keyboard for writing states. Small, repeatable bodily actions anchor feelings and performance with a reliability that words alone rarely match. Athletes cue explosive power with breath and stomp. Actors summon grief with a posture shift. A leader steadies their voice by planting their feet. These are internal anchors, embodied rituals and somatic cues that change how you feel and what you do. This chapter shows you how to build those anchors, how to make them portable across contexts, and how to undo the ones that don't serve you. Why the body? Because cognition is embodied. The brain doesn't sit in a vacuum. It is constantly reading signals from the viscera, the muscles, and the posture system. When you change your breathing, you alter CO2 and O2 levels, shift autonomic tone, and feed different information back into the brain. When you change posture, you alter proprioceptive feedback and muscle tension patterns that the brain interprets as readiness or relaxation. Over time, your nervous system learns to associate these bodily patterns with emotional and cognitive states. That associative learning is the same mechanism that builds any anchor. Repeated pairing forms predictable links, but here the cue lives inside you. That makes internal anchors especially useful. They're private, portable, and controllable. Start with breath because it's the easiest to access and one of the most effective. Slow, diaphragmatic breathing engages the parasympathetic nervous system and tends to lower heart rate and reactivity. Short, shallow breathing elevates arousal. If you want an anchor for calm before a presentation or negotiation, build a breath ritual. Inhale for count 4, hold for 2, exhale for 6, and repeat 3 times while orienting your body upright and releasing your shoulders. Pair this ritual with a single tactile cue, thumb and forefinger touch, or discrete fist squeeze, and immediately follow it with a brief mental label: steady, ready, clear. With consistent repetition, The breathing pattern plus tactile cue will begin to summon calm automatically. Posture is a second, underused lever. Standing or sitting in a posture associated with confidence. Open chest, shoulders down and back, chin level. Changes how you feel and how others perceive you. Amygdala-centered studies aside, the practical point is this. Posture alters proprioceptive feedback, which in turn shifts your internal narrative. If you want to feel more assertive in a meeting, adopt a posture of grounded openness for 30 seconds before you start speaking. Pair it with your breath ritual and a micro gesture, resting a hand on the table's edge. Over time, that posture becomes an anticipatory anchor. The moment you square your shoulders, your decision-centered circuitry begins to prime. Micro gestures are private anchors that can be used mid-interaction. Athletes use small pre-shot routines, bouncing a ball a fixed number of times, tapping a bat twice, to create consistency and reduce cognitive load. For public speaking or interviews, develop a tiny, repeatable gesture that's invisible to most listeners, a discreet finger press, a ring tap, or a subtle shift of weight. The key is consistency. Use a gesture every time you practice under realistic conditions, so the cue becomes linked to the mental state you want. Focus, calm, or deliberate energy. Ritualized sequences combine these elements into a more powerful anchor. A ritual strength comes from layered cues: breath, posture, microgesture, and a short phrase or visual focus. For example, a pre-performance ritual might be 3 slow breaths while facing an open space, a 2-second posture reset, feet grounded, shoulders back, a thumb and forefinger press, and the whispered tag, 1 action. That sequence, practiced before rehearsals, games, and low-stake performances, becomes a robust package. When the ritual is run, the nervous system slides more quickly into desired state because multiple signals converge to the same outcome. Generalization matters. Many internal anchors are context-bound. They work where you train them and not elsewhere. To make an anchor portable, practice it in varied contexts. If you want your pre-presentation ritual to work both in your living room and in a conference hall, run the ritual in both places during training. Slightly vary your clothing, time of day, and background noise so the association forms across contexts. If you can't simulate the exact environment, exaggerate the ritual in practice. Go through it with full intensity at home so smaller signals will be sufficient on the day. There are also ways to weaken unwanted internal anchors. Suppose a particular breath pattern now triggers anxiety because you repeatedly use it during stressful situations. To break that link, pair the same breath pattern with a strongly positive state repeatedly. Use counter conditioning. Exhale deeply, then immediately focus on a calming, pleasant image or a small reward. Over time, the breath will reassociate with the calmer state. Another approach is response substitution. When an anxious trigger appears, perform an alternative anchor, a grounding gesture, 3 stomps, or a tactile switch to interrupt the old loop and train the new one. Ethics and social awareness deserve a mention here too. Internal anchors are your private tools. They don't inherently infringe on others. But be mindful of context. A ritual that involves loud exhalations or heavy stamping may be inappropriate in quiet spaces. Also, some internal anchors rely on touch that could be misread in social settings. Keep public rituals unobtrusive and consent-friendly. Practical experiments make learning faster. Here are 3 you can try over the next 2 weeks. The 2-minute calm anchor, days 1 to 3. Establish, days 4 to 14. Reinforce each morning. Sit upright. Inhale for 4, hold 2. Exhale for 6, repeat 3 times. After the 3rd breath, press your thumb and forefinger together and whisper steady. Do this sequence 5 times daily in different rooms. At the end of the week, test it midday when you feel stressed and note the difference. The posture power drill, days 1 to 7 twice a day. Spend 60 seconds in a power posture. Feet grounded, chest open, arms uncrossed. Afterward, Immediately perform a small task requiring focus. Write 100 words. Do a 2-minute mental arithmetic exercise. Track whether you feel faster or more decisive when you begin the task after the posture. The performance mini ritual, rehearsal plus real, create a 4-step pre-performance ritual that includes breath, posture, a micro gesture, and a verbal tag. Practice it before every rehearsal. Then use it before at least 3 real, low-stakes interactions, a short talk, a team update, a client call. Notice how quickly attention and confidence coalesce when you run the ritual. Keep a short log, what you did, the context, and a 1-sentence note on how you felt afterwards. Small data will show patterns quickly. Finally, remember that internal anchors are not magic pills. They are tools that reduce friction and give you consistent entry points to states you value. Used thoughtfully, they increase agency. You don't wait for calm to arrive, you summon it. Used carelessly, they can become crutches or slip into superstition. The best anchors are simple, portable, and tied to real practice. Build them slowly, test them honestly, and keep the focus on usefulness. Does this anchor help you act in line with your values? If yes, keep it. If not, let it go. In the next chapter, we'll examine how to design environments and routines, habit architecture, that make those anchors part of a sustainable system for change. Chapter 7. Environment is the scaffolding of behavior. It sets the stage before you even decide what to do. A well-designed environment reduces the number of difficult decisions, catches you when your motivation dips, and amplifies tiny wins until they become identity-building habits. This chapter shows you how to think like an environment designer, how to architect spaces, physical and digital, routines and social settings, so that anchors do the heavy lifting for you, and how to redesign places that currently anchor unhelpful behavior. Think of habit architecture as intentional friction and facilitation. Anything in your environment can either add friction to behaviors you want to avoid or remove friction from behaviors you want to encourage. The principle is simple and brutally practical. Make the good choice easy, default invisible. Make the bad choice hard, effortful, and out of sight. The strategies below are straightforward, but their strength comes from consistency in small, repeated application. Start with cues. Cues are the triggers that start a behavior sequence. An alarm, a bowl of fruit on the counter, the placement of your running shoes by the door. Place cues for desired behaviors in the exact spot where the action should begin. Want to read more at night? Put a book on your pillow and your phone in another room. Want to stretch in the morning? Put your yoga mat next to your bed. Visual cues work best when they're both salient and specific. A bright mug that you only use for writing sessions, a folder labeled inbox, quick wins on your desktop. Next, use friction deliberately. Friction is often framed negatively, but it's a powerful tool when you want to avoid a habit. If you want to stop doom scrolling, uninstall social apps from your phone, or move them into a folder several screens away and require a password to reinstall. If you want to curb late-night snacking, replace accessible snacks with healthier options that require a prep step, like cutting fruit. The idea is to introduce small barriers that interrupt automatic sequences. Don't make friction so high you feel punished. The sweet spot is enough to make you pause. Defaults are the silent organizers of behavior. People accept defaults and routines because they conserve cognitive energy. Use defaults in your favor. Set calendar blocks for deep work. Set your thermostat to a temperature that supports sleep. Subscribe to a recurring donation if you want to give consistently, or auto-schedule workouts on your calendar. Defaults are not coercion when they're reversible. They're gentle scaffolding that keeps your best intentions aligned with your life. Stacking. Pairing a new habit with an existing one is a powerful architecture trick. If you already make coffee every morning, attach a 5-minute writing session to ritual. After I pour my first cup, I will write for 5 minutes. The old habit provides a cue. The new behavior piggybacks on its momentum. Habit stacking works because it relies on pre-existing anchors. It's easy to add a small action to a well-established chain than to create an entirely new chain from scratch. Design micro-commitments and public accountability into your plans. A micro-commitment is a tiny, low-cost action that signals intent and makes backtracking slightly more costly psychologically. Posting a short daily goal to a public chat channel or sharing a weekly progress note with a friend leverages social anchors, reputation, and social proof to keep you on track. Public accountability should be used thoughtfully. Choose an audience you trust and a commitment that's meaningful but not humiliating if you slip. Organize a media environment for one primary function at a time. Multi-purpose spaces dilute anchors. If your desk is also where you eat, watch videos, and sleep, it's harder for it to signal focus work. Decide on primary functions for physical zones: a work zone, a relaxation zone, a creative zone. Make those zones distinct with small sensory markers, lighting, textures, a dedicated object, so your brain reads the environment and selects the appropriate mental mode. Digital environment design matters just as much. Declutter your desktop. Create one focused browser profile without social tabs, and set app notifications only for essentials. Use website blockers during work hours and limit email checks to scheduled times. Your digital environment is especially prone to invisible anchors, bad notification sounds, a binge watch autoplay. Treat it like a physical space. Curate what enters and design clear boundaries. Design for relapse and repair. Environments aren't perfect, and neither are you. Expect slips and prepare easy repair rituals that lower the temperature of failure. If you miss a workout, have a 2-step repair plan. Do 2 minutes of movement now, then reschedule the session for tomorrow. A repair ritual is an anchor that stops the downward spiral from one lapse into a full derailment. Use commitment devices to lock in future behavior. These are structural anchors: a prepaid class, a non-refundable deposit, or a contract with consequences. Commitment devices change the payoff structure and make the future behavior more likely. They're particularly effective for time-inconsistent preferences. When your present self wants short-term comfort, but your future self wants progress. Choose commitment devices that align with your values and don't create undue risk or shame. Architect your social environment. Surround yourself with people whose habits you want to emulate. This is not about manipulation. It's about choosing contexts where the visible norms support your goals. Join a writing group if you want to write, a walking club if you want to move more. Social anchors, the visible habits of peers, are some of the strongest nudges we have. Make measurement simple and non-judgmental. Tracking is an anchor that turns vague intentions into concrete feedback. Use small, low-friction metrics: a habit streak on an app, a tally mark on a wall calendar, a 3-question journal entry each evening. The key is to measure in service of data, not shame. Measurement is useful for iteration. Look for patterns and adjust the environment when it consistently fails to produce desired behavior. Finally, redesign to break bad anchors. To weaken an unhelpful anchor, remove the cue, increase friction, introduce competing cues, or change the context. For example, if you have a habit of snacking while watching TV, remove snacks from the living room cue removal. Put them in opaque containers in a kitchen cabinet, friction and out of sight, and replace the cue with a new ritual: a cup of herbal tea during episodes, competing cue. Over time, the old association decays and the new one gains strength. Practical exercise. Pick one behavior you want to make easier and run a 5-step environment audit this week. Identify the current cue and sequence. What happens just before behavior? Remove or reduce the cue if the behavior is unwanted. Add or make the cue more visible if the behavior is desired. Add one friction point for an undesired behavior or remove one friction point for a desired behavior. Create a stacking partner. Attach the behavior to an existing routine. Choose a micro-commitment or default that supports the change and set a simple measurement, streak, checkbox, or 1 to 3 sentence log. Try this audit for 2 weeks and iterate. Keep notes on what worked and what didn't. Environment and habit architecture aren't about forcing willpower. They're about building a world where your better choices are the path of least resistance. By arranging cues, defaults, friction, and social anchors, you can make small wins inevitable, minimize reliance on heroic effort, and free your mind to focus on what matters. In the next chapter, we'll examine applications, how marketers, negotiators, therapists, and leaders use anchors in practice, with case studies and templates you can adapt ethically to your life. Chapter 8. This chapter brings anchors out of the lab and into the messy, human places where influence really matters. Markets, negotiations, therapy rooms, and leadership settings. The goal is practical. Show concrete ways anchors are used in each field. Give short case studies you can imagine, and leave you with portable templates you can adapt ethically. Across context, the same principles show up: layering cues, attaching emotion to repetition, and matching context to desired behavior. But the tactics and constraints differ. Let's walk through 4 major applications and finish with a compact, ethical checklist you can use before you deploy any anchor. Marketing. Shaping choice without deception. Marketers are expert anchor builders because their job is to convert attention into action. Sensory packaging, price framing, social proof, and repetition are the common levers. A typical ethical marketing anchor sequence looks like this. 1. Prime attention with a sensory cue, a crisp image, and inviting jingle. 2. Frame the choice so one option solves a specific problem. And 3. Make the desired action easy with defaults and social proof. Case study. A small coffee roaster wanted to sell a new espresso blend online. Instead of saying new blend, they anchored the product to a morning ritual. A short video showed a quiet kitchen, sun to the window, and a hand placed in the bag next to a favorite mug. Visual anchor plus story. The product page led with a headline framed as gain. Start calmer mornings with a 7-day subscription default and customer quotes about how it replaced my rush coffee. The result: higher conversion and fewer refunds, because buyers knew what they were buying and it fit a real ritual. Marketing template. Ethical. Identify the desired behavior. Trial, subscription, sign up. Choose 1 to 2 sensory anchors. Image, sound, tactile promise. Frame the benefit in user terms: gain or avoid loss. Don't overclaim. Add a small default, easy subscription or trial, and visible social proof. Measure and iterate. Remove anchors causing regret. Negotiation. Anchoring numbers and identities. Negotiators use a numeric anchor, the first number that sets a zone for the discussion, and social/identity anchors that frame who the parties are: partner versus adversary. But successful negotiation isn't about making a single dramatic opening. It's about establishing legitimate anchors that narrow the zone of possible agreement while preserving relationship and options. Case study: 2 departments negotiated budget allocation. One side opened with a high but clearly justified anchor, a projected plan tied to deliverables, not demands. Instead of "we want $1.2 million," They presented a phased anchor. With $1.2 million, we could deliver A, B, C by Q4. With $800,000, we deliver A and B now, C later, anchoring multiple reference points and offering contrast. The phased anchor reduced offensiveness and allowed a compromise that preserved key outcomes. Negotiation template. Prepare an evidence-backed anchor, number plus rationale. Offer contrast options, phased or bundled alternatives. Use labeling and pacing. Name the counterpart's concerns, then lead to your proposal. Request reciprocity. Small concession for small concession. Keep a repair ritual. A short pause and reframing when talks get heated. Therapy and behavior change. Anchoring toward well-being. Therapists use anchors to change how people feel and respond. In cognitive behavioral approaches, anchors can be sensory paired with coping strategies, assent with relaxation, or narrative anchors that reframe identity. I am someone who faces challenges. Exposure therapy, counter-conditioning, and ritualized practices are all forms of anchored learning. Case study. A client with public speaking anxiety used a mixed anchor, a tactile cue, a discrete wristband, a breath ritual, and a narrative anchor, I am prepared. In sessions, they practiced a ritual while delivering short speeches. The therapist gradually generalized practice to different venues. Over months, the wristband plus breath began to reduce anticipatory anxiety, even in new contexts. Therapy template for clinicians or self-help. Identify the undesired response, panic, avoidance. Choose a small, private anchor, breath plus tactile cue. Pair the anchor with a manageable exposure and a calming post-response. Reinforce in varied contexts to generalize. Monitor for unintended associations and recondition if necessary. Leadership, modeling culture through anchors. Leaders anchor behavior by modeling and ritualizing. A leader's posture, timing of feedback, and rituals, start of meeting check-ins, end of week shout-outs. Signal what's normal and rewarded. Good leaders deliberately use anchors to reduce ambiguity and to institutionalize values. Case study. A CEO wanted meetings to begin on time and be solution-focused. They started modeling the anchor. Every meeting began with a 2-minute progress and obstacle ritual, and the CEO praised concise updates. Over months, the culture shifted. Punctuality improved, and meetings became shorter and more outcome-oriented. Crucially, the CEO made the ritual visible so others could copy it. Leadership template. Choose one behavior to anchor in your team, e.g. punctuality. Model the behavior consistently and visibly. Create a small, repeatable ritual that supports the behavior. Use gentle social proof, public praise, and remove conflicting cues. Revisit rituals quarterly to ensure they still serve the team. Short checklist before deploying any anchor. Consent. Could this reasonably be resisted by the person? If not, rethink. Clarity. Does the anchor clarify choices rather than obscure them? Reversibility. Can people opt out without harm or shame? Beneficence. Does the anchor benefit the target's welfare or autonomy? Measurement. How will you know it worked, and how will you detect harm? Across fields, the common pattern is the same. Anchor a desired state with layered cues. Link it to a clear benefit. Make the desired action easy, and preserve the target's agency and dignity. Anchors are powerful because they work quietly and repeatedly. That power calls for restraint. Use anchors to make good choices simple, to restore agency where it's been eroded, and to help people make decisions that genuinely align with their goals. In the final chapter, we'll focus on dismantling harmful anchors and give you a 12-week toolkit to apply what you've learned. Chapter 9. Some anchors help us. They steady attention, sharpen performance, and make good choices simpler. Other anchors trap us. They replay old fears, push us toward unhealthy habits, or bend our autonomy without our permission. Dismantling a harmful anchor isn't about willpower alone. It's about understanding how the anchor was built and then using that same learning machinery to change the association. This chapter gives you a clear, humane playbook for weakening or removing anchors that don't serve you. With practical techniques you can use immediately and a short program to guide change. The basic strategy has 4 steps. Notice, interrupt, replace, reinforce. Each step borrows from behavioral science, extinction, counterconditioning, reinforcement, and practical psychology, implementation intentions, mental contrasting. Think of them as a short sequence you practice until a new pattern becomes a default. Notice, map the anchor. Dismantling begins with accurate observation. Harmful anchors are often invisible because they run below awareness. Keep a simple anchor log for 7 days. Focus specifically on the behavior you want to change. Each time the behavior begins or you feel the urge, record immediate cue, what happened just before, context, where you were, who was present, thoughts or words that ran through your head, bodily sensations, and the action that followed. 1 line per instance is enough. Why this works. Anchors are context sensitive. Mapping them reveals the specific cues and chains that maintain the habit. With the map, you stop guessing and start targeting the actual triggers. Interrupt, create a pause. Once you know the cue, introduce a short interrupt between the cue and the habitual response. Interrupts break automaticity and give conscious choice room to enter. The interrupt should be simple and immediate. A single deep breath, a 3-second count, a step back from the situation, a preposition-fitted object, or a scripted phrase you say aloud, e.g., not now. The interrupt does not need to stop the urge permanently. Its aim is to delay and weaken the automatic linkage. Practical trick. Pair the interrupt with an easily performed microaction. Touch your wrist, stand up, or take 1 sip of water. The tactile action helps the nervous system register a different pattern and makes the interrupt more reliable under stress. Replace, countercondition with constructive anchor. Extinction. Repeatedly experiencing a cue without the expected outcome can weaken an anchor, but it's slow and vulnerable to relapse. Counterconditioning is faster. Pair the original cue with a new, positive response, so the cue begins to predict something different. For example, if a particular app notification cues doom scrolling, replace the immediate response by opening a short, meaningful ritual, 2 minutes of breath work, a 30-second stretch, or reading a single paragraph from a chosen book. If an interpersonal phrase triggers anxiety and automatic agreement, replace the response with short, assertive script like, I need a moment to think, followed by the breath interrupt. Design replacements that are feasible in the moment, emotionally satisfying, not punitive, and repeat it until a new link gains strength. Replacements work best when they offer an equivalent or slightly better payoff than the old habit, something the nervous system will accept. Reinforce, make the new pattern easier and rewarding. Once a replacement is established, stack environment changes and social anchors to make it stick. Move cues that support the old habit out of sight, add friction to the unwanted behavior, and make the desired behavior the path of least resistance. Use micro-rewards. An encouraging note, a small treat or a 30-second victory ritual directly after the replacement behavior. Public commitments and accountability partners accelerate reinforcement. Telling a friend, I'll text you after I complete a 10-minute write, creates reputational costs for slipping. Techniques and tools to use in combination. Implementation intentions. If then plans pre-script the interrupt and replacement, If I see the red app icon, then I will exhale twice and read one paragraph. Implementation intentions make execution automatic by linking cue to action in advance. Mental contrasting plus WOP. Imagine the benefits of change, then identify the single biggest obstacle and make a concrete plan. This strengthens motivation and clarifies which anchors must be changed. Habit substitution with novelty. New anchors generalize faster when practiced in varied contexts. Run the replacement in different places and social settings to reduce context dependence. Exposure plus response prevention. For anxiety-linked anchors, certain phobias, or compulsive rituals, gradually expose yourself to the trigger while preventing the habitual response. Pair this with professional guidance when necessary. Delay and decouple for cravings. Add short waiting periods before acting on cravings and create a decoupling ritual, e.g., drink a glass of water, walk to another room. Many impulses decline substantially within 10 to 15 minutes if they aren't reinforced. Cognitive reappraisal. Change the meaning attached to a cue. If a particular email notification used to signal urgency, reframe it in your mind as informational, not urgent. Combine reappraisal with behavior replacement for stronger effect. Social re-anchor. Enlist others to shift social cues. If a toxic group habit keeps pulling you back, name the pattern with the group and propose a new ritual. Social change changes the environment swiftly when others cooperate. Scripts and micro-responses you can use now. For manipulative language. I hear you. I need a minute to consider that properly. Breath interrupt plus pause. For pushy sales, I appreciate the offer. I'll review it and get back to you by day/time. Delay plus decision point. For peer pressure conform. I'm curious about that, but I want to do it differently. Reframe plus alternative. For emotional contagion, place a hand on your sternum, breathe 3 times, and say, I'm okay. Tactile anchor plus breath. A 4-week dismantling mini-plan practical timeline. Week 1, map and interrupt. Keep an anchor log. Identify top 1 to 2 cues. Choose an interrupt and practice it every time the cue appears. No pressure to stop the habit. Just delay and observe. Week 2, design replacements. Pick a satisfying replacement behavior. Script an if-then plan. Practice replacements in safe, varied contexts at least twice daily. Week 3, environment and social support. Remove easy access to cues, add friction to the old behavior, and announce a micro-commitment to one trusted ally. Use micro-rewards and track a simple streak. Week 4, generalize and harden. Practice the replacement under real-world stressors, varied contexts, and run short relapse repair rituals. 2-step recovery. 1. Interrupt. 2. Perform replacement. 3. Log and move on. Evaluate and adjust. Relapse is normal. Don't treat slips as moral failure. Use them as data. What cue showed up unexpectedly? Which context we can interrupt? Tweak and continue. Anchor change is incremental. Small wins compound. Finally, protect your autonomy socially and digitally. Set clear boundaries, notification rules, meeting norms, name manipulative patterns when they arise, and cultivate a few internal anchors for resilience. A calm breath ritual, a posture reset, and a short phrase that reminds you of your values. Weakening harmful anchors is not about erasing yourself. It's about reclaiming the steering wheel so your choices align with who you want to be. In the next final chapter, we'll synthesize everything into a practical 12-week anchor toolkit. Step-by-step templates you can adapt to build new anchors and dismantle the old ones. combining sensory, linguistic, social, and embodied tools into a coherent plan. Chapter 10. This book began with a simple claim. Much of what we call choice is scaffolded by invisible anchors, tiny cues, repeated pairings, and social patterns that steer attention and action before conscious deliberation has a chance. Over 10 chapters, we map the landscape that creates those anchors, the brain's associated machinery, the senses that feed it, the language that frames it, the social systems that multiply it, the body that hosts it, and the environments that scaffold it. We examine how those same mechanisms power marketing, negotiation, therapy, and leadership, and we learned humane, science-grounded ways to build anchors that help rather than harm. If you take one thing away, let it be this. Anchors are tools, not fate. Once you detect them, you can design them. Once you design them, you can choose whether they serve the life you want. That shift, from feeling pushed by invisible forces to knowing how to shape them, is the practical heart of this book. The rest of this chapter is a compact, hands-on plan, a 12-week toolkit you can adapt to build new anchors, weaken harmful ones, and wire your environment for choices that matter. It's intentionally modular. Use the parts that fit your life, iterate, and be gentle with yourself. Real change is incremental. Weeks 1 to 2, awareness and mapping. Start small. Keep an anchor log focused on one target behavior, either something you want to start or stop. Record the cue, context, immediate thought, bodily sensations, and the action that followed. Make one-line entries. After 10 to 14 days, look for patterns. Time of day, sensory triggers, social context, or internal states that reliably precede the behavior. Your job these 2 weeks is to gather facts, not to fix anything. Clear, unemotional data is a foundation for effective change. Weeks 3 to 4, interrupt and design replacements. Choose one simple interrupt and one replacement behavior. Your interrupt must be immediate and tiny, a single deep breath, 3-second count, or a tactile press. Your replacement should be feasible in the moment and mildly rewarding. 2 minutes of focused breathing, a 1-paragraph writing burst, a cup of tea, or a short walk. Script and if-then plan. If I notice X, then I will do Y. Practice the interrupt and replacement deliberately at least twice a day in low-stakes moments, so the link doesn't rely solely on strength of will. Weeks 5 to 6, anchor building and layering. Now build layered anchors around the replacement. Pair with sensory cue, a specific scent, a short playlist, or a unique mug, a micro gesture, thumb and forefinger press, tiny ring tap, and a short phrase you say quietly. Practice the whole sequence in varied contexts to avoid context-bound learning. At home, on a walk, in a cafe. At the end of week 6, test the anchor in a real trigger situation and note how much delay the interrupt provides and how satisfying the replacement feels. Week 7 to 8, environment design and defaults. Apply the environment principles to make the new pattern easier and the old one harder. Remove or hide cues that support the unwanted behavior, add friction to it, and place cues for new behavior where the action begins. Use defaults and micro-commitments. Schedule calendar blocks. Set a recurring reminder with a linked ritual or prepay a class. Invite a trusted friend to be an accountability partner for the month and report small wins weekly. Keep measurement light. A simple streak, checkbox, or one-line evening log works well. Weeks 9 to 10, social reinforcement and scaling. Bring social anchors into the plan. Publicize a small, reversible commitment to your group. Create a short ritual that your team can adopt, or swap stories with peers about progress. Use social proof intentionally. Share early wins, not a boast, but to normalize a new behavior. If you're dismantling a harmful anchor tied to a group norm, name the pattern and propose the alternative ritual. Often people want permission to change and a visible model to follow. Weeks 11 to 12. Harden, generalize, and plan for maintenance. Generalize the anchor across settings and stressors. Practice the interrupt and replacement under fatigue, time pressure, and social distraction. Introduce small variability in practice. Different rooms, clothing, times of day. Create a 3-step relapse repair ritual. 1. Interrupt. 2. Perform replacement. 3. Record one quick note about what triggered the slip and what you'll try next. Finally, codify maintenance. Set quarterly reviews, adjust the environment as life changes, and keep at least one private anchor, a breath ritual, a posture reset, or a micro gesture that you refresh weekly. How to measure progress without turning it into pressure. Progress is noisy. Don't make perfect the enemy of getting better. Use simple, low-friction metrics, a streak count, a weekly tally, or a 1-sentence journal prompt. Ask 3 questions weekly. Did the new anchor make this decision easier? Where did I slip and why? What small tweak will I try next? Use slips as data, not moral verdicts. If a pattern persists despite your best efforts, revise the plan. Maybe the cue wasn't the main driver, or the replacement needs a more satisfying payoff, or the environment still cues the old habit too strongly. Ethics and consent. A final test before you deploy an anchor. Anchors are influence. Before you set one that affects others, run it through a quick ethical checklist. Is this reversible? Does it respect autonomy? Does it require consent in shared spaces, scents, soundscapes? Will it produce net benefit for those affected? If you can't answer yes clearly, redesign. Influence without respect is coercion. Influence with respect is compassion in practice. Troubleshooting common problems. If the interrupt fails under stress, simplify it further. A single word or a physical tap may be more reliable. If the replacement feels unsatisfying, upgrade the payoff temporarily. A small treat, applause from a partner, until the new neural link strengthens. If context dependence limits the anchor, deliberately practice the replacement in varied settings. If social anchors work against you, change who you ask for feedback or reshape the norms by modeling the new ritual visibly and consistently. A short epilogue, practice over perfection. Anchors aren't magic shortcuts. They're practical engineering for the human mind. They reduce friction, conserve attention, and make good choices habitual. The 12-week plan is not a guarantee but a scaffold. It smooths the path from intention to action. The real transformation isn't in a single ritual or a scent or phrase. It's to become the kind of person who notices the forces shaping choices and then shapes them back. That kind of agency is contagious. When you build anchors that support your values, you make it easier for others to do the same. Go gently. Start small. Notice closely. And remember, the point of influence isn't to control other people. It's to create conditions where people, including you, can act in line with their own goals freely and well. Thank you for doing the careful work of noticing and designing. The world is quietly shaped by what we repeat. Make your repeats count.